This week, a field general court-martial convicted the former Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate Chief, Lieutenant General Faiz Hameed, to 14 years in prison. The court-martial is said to have found him guilty of engaging in political activities, violating anti-espionage laws, and abusing his authority. The court-martial has been held in tight secrecy, but some charges are also reported to be related to corruption in a housing project. According to some accounts, the army is also pressuring General Faiz to give evidence against former Prime Minister Imran Khan, potentially setting the stage for the politician to receive a long prison sentence. Today, I want to look at one specific issue. As I'll show you, Pakistani generals have been punished plenty of times before for rebelling against the military establishment, even though most received forgiveness after some time. What's new this time is that a general is paying the price for propping up a system. General Faiz acted in support of a regime his boss, Chief of Army Staff General Qamar Bajwa, gave birth to and endorsed. This kind of post facto vengeance has been reserved for politicians by the army. And this move, therefore, changes everything. Field Marshal Asim Munir might seem all powerful right now, but he's sitting on a case of exploding mangoes. And every army chief who succeeds him will be a threat as well. Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Print Explorer. First, let me explain what that case of exploding mangoes is about. I'll tell you a first-hand story. Each summer, ever since she could remember, my friend, let's just call her A, my friend's family had sent cases of Chausa, Sindri, Langda and Anwar Ratol from their gardens to the eminent and important of their city. The corps commander, the superintendent of police, the local judges, everyone who was anyone got a case of mangoes. Then came the summer of 1988, a year of a particularly resplendent harvest. The strange thing my friend remembers is that people wouldn't let the mango cases pass their front doors, an act of incredible rudeness, even hostility. The previous year, in August, you see, General Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq's C-130 transport had exploded just after takeoff, killing Pakistan's military ruler, also America's ambassador to Islamabad, and a host of other high officials. A preliminary investigation blamed the crash on an explosive device. There were stories never proven that that bomb had been stashed on board in a case of mangoes. People were very nervous about mangoes after that. Ever since its founding in 1947, Pakistan has seen 10, maybe 11, depending on how you count, coups. Those coups have come in two flavors though. 5 or maybe 6 were carried out directly or indirectly by the army establishment against the government. Another 5 though were rebel coups operating against the military leadership itself and whoever its political allies were at the time. The perpetrators of what we could call the official coups, that is, coups carried out to defend the institutional primacy of the Pakistani armed forces, were protected to the bitter end even if they violated the constitution. For their part, the men who carried out the rebel coups all faced severe punishment, though they were mostly forgiven in good time if they wore a uniform. There is one exception to both these rules. If the story about the mango bomb is true, it shows the Pakistan army is also willing to get rid of its own when they're threatening to bring the ceiling down on the establishment's head. General Zia, remember, had brought Pakistan through war against the Soviet Union, but had become increasingly isolated from the West and unpopular at home. General Zia needed to go, but he didn't seem to get the message. Then, one fine day, it suddenly ceased to matter whether or not he got the message. Let's start looking at the 5 official coups, the coups where the army intervened to evict politicians or regimes who weren't doing what they had been told to do. The first of these, strangely perhaps, wasn't a military coup at all. In 1953, against a backdrop of growing anti-Ahmadi violence, Governor General Ghulam Muhammad dismissed Prime Minister Khwaja Nazimuddin and his government. The next year, the Governor General sacked the entire Constituent Assembly. What this achieved was making clear just who was boss, which is why I'm counting it as a coup. The army showed it was the only organized institution which could hold the country together. After the anti-Ahmadi riots broke out, Punjab had to be given over to military rule to stop the rioting. No one else, not the politicians, not their parties, could end the violence. Later, in 1958, Pakistan's first president, Major General Iskandar Ali, sacked the constituency again and dismissed the government of Prime Minister Feroz Khan Noon. Then, General Iskandar Ali appointed Army Commander-in-Chief, later Field Marshal Ayub Khan, as the Chief Martial Law Administrator. Field Marshal Ayub, the first to hold that rank in Pakistan's history, was taking no chances. 13 days after he took power, he exiled Major General Iskandar Ali, I guess just in case his boss had second thoughts. Remember though, General Iskandar Ali was sent to a comfortable exile, not put in prison. 3. After Pakistan's catastrophic defeat in the War of 71, when Bangladesh was created, Brigadier Farooq Bakht Ali, Brigadier Iqbal Mehdi Shah, Colonel Aleem Afridi and Colonel Agha Javed Iqbal and Lieutenant Colonel Muhammad Khurshid Hussain, as well as a bunch of other officers, kicked out the country's disgraced military leader, General Yahya Khan. General Yahya Khan had replaced General Ayub as army chief. 4. In 1977, Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali was marched into jail by his hand-picked army chief, General Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq, and then marched to the gallows. And 5. General Parvez Musharraf lost the Kargil war and then shot down a bid by Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to hold him accountable for the disaster. He initiated a coup against Nawaz Sharif. Nawaz Sharif had appointed General Ziauddin as Musharraf's replacement. General Ziauddin spent several years in house arrest. For his part, General Musharraf was actually sentenced to death by public hanging over 3 days. But this unusual lower court verdict was overturned by an appeal. The general eventually received no punishment, though he did have to live out his life in comfortable exile in Dubai. Even though the perpetrators of all these coups were by definition guilty of crimes against the constitution, the Supreme Court protected them. The Supreme Court had endorsed a principle called the doctrine of state necessity. Essentially, this doctrine meant that anything the army did was legitimate if it was necessary to do it in the interests of the survival of the state. The doctrine was overthrown in 2022 but has been resurrected during the legal war to marginalize the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf party. So from 2024, it's been back in play. The legal power that provided the general's immunity from punishment, though, has been now decisively ended by Field Marshal Munir. The punishment handed out to General Faiz crosses an important line. Although the Pakistan Army has punished its own, it's only done so when they acted against the military leadership. And as I said, forgiveness was always on the table. Now though, the vengeance and vendetta reserved for politicians, remember the hanging of Zia, has been unleashed within the army itself. The second category of military actions to seize control of the state you might call rebel coups. They were coups carried out by groups of officers without the involvement of their peers, seniors, or the army command. The first and without doubt the most fascinating of these rebel coups was led by Major General Akbar Khan. Major General Akbar Khan was the key figure in executing Pakistan's invasion of Kashmir in 1947-1948. To pretend that he wasn't a military officer, he used the codename General Tariq. Together with a very colourful cast of characters, among them some fellow officers, but also the left-wing poet Faiz Ahmad Faiz and the writer and Communist Party leader Sajjad Zahir, General Akbar sought to overthrow Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan. Akbar and Faiz were sentenced to death for treason. But the system let them off. The general ended up spending 5 years in prison for the coup. Faiz ended up getting 4 years, like most of the other coup plotters. The plotters, interestingly, were all rehabilitated after the 1971 war. Akbar Khan even served as ambassador to Czechoslovakia. It's the only instance I can think of someone convicted of treason going on to be a representative of their country. Later, in 1973, a group of officers led by Brigadier Farooq Bakht Ali were alleged to have mounted a coup bid against Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. If the name Brigadier Farooq Bakht Ali sounds familiar, remember, he was part of the same group of officers who had deposed General Yahya Khan in 1971 and cleared the path for Prime Minister Bhutto. And here they were trying to get rid of him. General Ali and several of his fellow officers, though, had been enraged by Bhutto's decision not to punish the officers claimed to be responsible for the 1971 disaster. Though it is still unclear if either Ali or the younger officers he associated with were actually planning a coup or just discussing it, they were arrested and given death sentences in 1973. There were many dark ironies in the events that followed. General Zia-ul-Haq, who would overthrow Bhutto in 1978, presided over the court-martial against the coup plotters against Bhutto that sentenced General Ali to death. Bhutto ended up in a death row cell just a few meters from where General Ali was held. The difference was that while Bhutto was hanged, Ali was released in May 1978 and immigrated to Canada. A third rebel coup was carried out in 1973 by Major General Tajammul Hussain Malik, one of a handful of Pakistani officers who is said to have performed well in the course of the Bangladesh War. Furious at being bypassed for promotion, General Tajammul ended up warring with his superiors and was removed from service. In his autobiography, General Tajammul claims that Army Chief Zia-ul-Haq described him as a fanatic. A real irony again, because Zia-ul-Haq was the person who would launch official Islamization in Pakistan. Following his retirement, General Tajammul cultivated organizations of the religious right wing, including the Jamaat-e-Islami, the Jamaat-Ulema-Islam and the Khaksar movement. In March 1980, soon after Bhutto's execution, the 3rd Battalion of the Baloch Regiment was moved to Rawalpindi, the very unit where General Tajammul had begun his military career. His son, Naveed Tajammul, served as adjutant in the unit. Through his son, Tajammul attempted to mount a coup to create an Islamic state, but was betrayed to the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate. The 4th rebel coup attempt we know of came in 1995, when Major General Zahirul Islam Abbasi and Brigadier Muntasir Billah planned to overthrow Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, as well as the then Army Chief Abdul Wahid Kakad. Their objective is said to have been to create an Islamic state in cooperation with the jihadist leader Qari Saifullah Akhtar. The conspirators got prison sentences of between 7 and 14 years, though most were successful in gaining remission of their sentences from Pakistan's Supreme Court. A 5th attempt to seize military power came in 2014 when a group of naval officers attempted to seize a frigate, the PNS Zulfikar, and use it to launch an attack on the United States Navy. Led by Lieutenant Zishan Rafiq, several of the plotters were later arrested while attempting to flee into Afghanistan. 5 were sentenced to death, but we don't know what actually happened in those cases. Karl Marx, surveying the events of the mid-19th century, observed that coups needed enabling circumstances. Preparation in secret, execution at a time when adversaries weren't prepared, and in situations where politics was fraught and institutions weak. There is no successful coup which takes place simply by accident or whim, or as the result of some event. Instead, provocations and crises provide the pretext to overthrow a system or to political threats that the military perceives itself as facing. The conditions in Pakistan are tailor-made for coups. because the establishment is fractured along three different axes. There is a clerical class and the religious parties, which, though they command little electoral power, wield enormous power over public imagination. They shape discourse on everything from personal life to the ideas of justice and virtue. Then there is the military and to a lesser extent the civilian bureaucracy, which has a chokehold on the use of coercive power. Legitimacy for the third force, the politicians, derives from elections. But all of the country's political formations have been willing to corrupt democracy by seeking support from the military and the religious extremists. That means the politicians are just one among many players, not the top of the pile like in India. There's little doubt the five official coups had the support of Pakistan's officer class, as it found itself confronted by various crises. The coup of 1953 was not, properly speaking, a military coup. Governor General Ghulam Muhammad dismissed the government of Prime Minister Khwaja Nazimuddin despite it enjoying the support of the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan. Then in 1954, he dismissed the Constituent Assembly itself to ensure that it didn't pass a constitution that restricted the Governor General's powers. This gave the army a high degree of control in Pakistan's political life. General Ayub Khan, who had become army chief in 1951, was able to leverage these circumstances to his advantage. The war in Kashmir, followed by massive religious violence that had led Punjab to being submitted by military rule, demonstrated the army was the only organized institution in the country. The Muslim League, which had created Pakistan, had much of its support in what was the United Provinces, now Uttar Pradesh, not in Punjab, the heart of Pakistan. Though there was notional civil rule, the reality of the weakness of political parties ensured it meant nothing. By 1958, the threat to the military and the bureaucratic establishment was becoming more stark. This time, the idea of a coup had two authors, President Iskandar Mirza and Commander-in-Chief Muhammad Ayub Khan. Both of them represented extra-parliamentary institutions, that is, the state administration and the army. But both drew their legitimacy from nomination and not from election. Members of these institutions, following a rapid rise to higher posts in the state establishment during the first years after independence, had no desire to give up power. For them, Pakistan without a constitution was a lot better than Pakistan with a constitution. The elections, scheduled for 15 February 1959, thus constituted a real threat to the military elite. The generals feared they might be forced to yield power to political representatives who would not be content with being puppets of the bureaucrats and the military. Ensuring Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was made Prime Minister after 1971 also served a military objective that's not often understood. It helped dissociate the officer class of collective responsibility for failure in the war and instead shoved the blame on the single person of General Yahya Khan. The military was able to associate itself, moreover, with Bhutto's populist nationalism. When that populism failed and political opposition to Bhutto grew on the streets, General Zia kicked him out of power. Thus, he established the army's credentials as a guardian of fair play and Islam. General Musharraf's actions were designed to limit political oversight over the army and its resources. This is the same motive that has led to the massive expansion of military power under Field Marshal Asim Munir. Though this time, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif are letting the generals have their way, probably wizened by experience. The five rebel coups, though, demonstrate that the army also contains the fractures and political crises of the wider society of its time. The attempt to mount a left-wing coup by General Akbar Khan and the Islamist coup by General Brigadier F.B. Ali represented popular currents in society, which were also visible in democratic politics. The Islamist-leaning coups of Major General Tajammul Malik, General Zahirul Islam Abbasi and the Al-Qaeda naval plot all marked the steady rightward shift in Pakistani politics. This shift was, of course, what was exploited by military leaders from General Zia onwards, as well as by politicians. The continued popularity of former Prime Minister Imran Khan, at least among a section of people, means the political order Field Marshal Munir presides over is on test. Long-term economic stagnation or social crisis could tip the scales not just under Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, but also against the Field Marshal himself. As the army demonstrated in the case of General Zia, it's willing to act when a tyrant's power threatens the collective interest. As I said, Field Marshal Asim Munir is thus sitting on a case of exploding mangoes, not a throne. It's probably not a comfortable place. Ensuring it doesn't go off will involve an endless struggle, not just against his political enemies, but also his friends within the army. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of The Print Explorer.